screen,
Okay.
which you can ignore.
All right, I think it's just about us. We're just about to kickstart the show. And lastly, at the end, feel free if you've got any social media stuff that you'd like to share, feel free to do so. Do you have a Facebook page?
No.
Oh, all right.
Actually, I just don't. I'm old-fashioned. I have a carrier pigeon.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna start the webinar. It's past. Enjoy,
All right.
everybody.
Thank you. Let's do this. All right. We'll just give everybody just a second or two just to log on to the call and get this show on the road. I think today's call is quite an exciting one. I think I'm really excited about this and looking forward to hearing some cool stuff about different landscapes and how we can bring some of those landscape ideas back into South Africa. Good morning, Mr. Anthony. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
I must say, Anthony, you look very handsome. Eh? You make this look good. You make this online webinar story look really good. What's your secret?
Thank you. I did make a special effort.
I absolutely love it. Good morning, everybody. My name is John, and once again, we are back at this beautiful platform of ours where we welcome amazing speakers who come and share some amazing work that they are currently busy with. And today we have a very special guest, Mr. Anthony Wain. He's going to be taking us about beautiful spaces and landscapes based on the photo that you see up on your screen. But before I introduce him, let me just quickly say hello to everybody. Take this opportunity to welcome one another. As we always do it, please let us know where you're connecting with us from. So we can welcome you properly. We just have about less than a minute or so just to make sure that everybody has joined us on this call, and then we'll be up and running. And I see we've got Mr. Anthony. I think today you're going to be blown away. We've got our friends joining us from all over. We've got guys from Vanderbilt Park, Justine. Hi, Justine. Absolutely amazing to have you on the call. We've got our friend Fiona. Fiona is connecting with us from Zimbabwe. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful country. And one of these good days, we'll get Mr. Anthony to tell us a little bit about the landscape that we find over there. We've got Jill. We've got another one from, we've got Jill from Zimbabwe as well. Albertina, welcome everybody. We've got our friends from the UK, as we always do it. Roger, how's the weather like in the UK? I think the UK is always so cold. All we can do, Mr. Anthony, is just tell everybody how beautiful South Africa is so they can come this side. We've got, let me see who you have. We have Jenny. Jenny connecting with us from Newlands. Hey, Jenny, absolute pleasure to have the locals on the platform. We've got Desiree from Pretoria. Absolutely amazing. Ladies and gents, it's always a pleasure to have each and every one of you joining us on this amazing call. As we always do it, you know, we are absolutely thankful for the opportunities to be able to share time with the wonderful speakers that we do. Now, let me not take too much time and take this opportunity to thank all our collaborators, everybody that's working behind the scene to make this possible. Let me thank Kathy. Kathy's always going out of her way, trying to find all these amazing speakers. Kathy, thank you so much. To Belinda and the team back at Strike, absolute pleasure. Without you guys, would not be able to do this. We also have very important partners and sponsors that make this very, very worth it and actually make it happen. Let me start with one of our most important stakeholder on this platform, Room to Grow. As you all know, Room to Grow has been designing and creating outdoor living spaces in and around Cape Town since 2002. The company offers a complete suite of landscape design, construction, maintenance, and associated exterior design elements. Room to Grow specializes in understanding and translating customers' desires to create a unique environment that reflects the individual's character that inhibits them. Now, if some of you are out there as we getting into this talk, learning about landscapes, and you want to zhuzh up your garden, as you always say, please check out Room to Grow. www.roomtogrow.co.za is a place to be. They've got some amazing projects. Check out what they're doing. Give them a call. Just give them a call and find out what they're busy with. And perhaps maybe you can pick up some ideas and they can come and work with you in your backyard. Strake, without Strake, that publishes amazing books. Again, this would not be possible. Let me tell you a little bit about Strake. They are the leading specialist in natural history publisher in Southern Africa. They are associated with the best-selling and mostly highly regarded field guides in the region. They publish full-color illustrated books across a variety of subjects. We're talking birds, mammals, reptiles, trees, flowers, marine environment, geology, astronomy, general wildlife, you name it, they got it. So please go check out Strake, again, www.strakenatureclub.co.za for more information. We also have our friends from SANB, the South African National Botanical Gardens, specifically Kirstenbosch, who, you know, part of this arrangement of webinars as we do it throughout the year. So thanks to our colleagues from SANB for always being supportive of this amazing projects. Now, ladies and gentlemen, without any waste of time, please allow me. Mr. Anthony Wain has an extensive CV, and this is my time now to shine and put you on the spotlight. Let me tell you a little bit about our speaker today. Anthony, he's part of the Planning Partners International Limited, the company that he currently runs. He is a professionally, or he's professionally registered landscape architect and a horticultural scientist with 33 years of experience. He has worked on many diverse projects in more than 17 countries around the world. Anthony's work in landscape planning and landscape horticultural practices encompasses World Heritage Sites, city parks, major urban mixed development projects, conservation landscapes, historic gardens, and the landscape of wineries, marines, and destination resorts. His work has involved extensive public participation with local and regional communities, local and international clients and NGOs as well. He has published, in fact, he's presented on many anecdotal papers on his projects. He has spoken globally. And I think if you just Google him, you'll find a really interesting presentation on YouTube. So I can't stress this enough. This is such an honor and a privilege to welcome you on this platform, Mr. Wain. It's always good to have individuals that have amazing passion like you to come and share some good ideas. Now, before I hand over to Mr. Anthony, let me remind everybody, if you have any questions or comments that you'd like Mr. Anthony to answer at the end of this particular call, please go to the Q&A section, put your comment down, and we'll sure to get Mr. Anthony to answer it a little bit later on. Now, from my side, I will see everybody on the other side of the call. Mr. Anthony, over to you. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. So I'm going to read a little bit. I'm going to sort of talk a little bit off the cuff, and we'll make it up as we go along. And I've got some very interesting slides to show you. So if you can put the next slide on, please. Next slide. Thank you. Lahore Walled City is a place of storytelling, a place of imagination, dreams, and sometimes despair. It is a palimpsest recording the life stories of both real people, the rulers and the ruled, all layered in mud, blood, and masonry. A city story. Where to begin? Say 2 or more centuries ago. Next slide, please. Next. Next slide. Imagine a broiling, sorry, back. 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 Back.
There's a little delay that you might be seeing, Anthony.
Sorry, you need to go back to slide number, that's just stay there for now. Okay. All right, now advance one. Thank you. Stop there, stop. That's fine. Okay, thank you, that's fine. Great. Imagine a broiling monster. No. Advance. Next. Next. Okay. Imagine a broiling monsoon-drenched plain, all set about by fantastic forests and palmy groves. Imagine a city embraced by the voluptuous curve of the River Ravi, swollen by the rains, sweltered by the sun, loud with the crush and clamour of the Silk Road's merchant trade and talk. This was a major city of the ancient world. And see the combination there of landfall, fortification, forests, and this amazing Indian landscape. And at that stage, it was all India and not Pakistan. Next, please. It was a city so fabulous and so opulent and ornate, so proud that its domes, towers, and tropical trees competed for skyline space. The river was the lifeblood of the city. The river was the reason for the city being there. And with the city came the need for defensive fortifications, and then therefore the walls and the tall towers, which are partly for sort of observation and partly are used as minarets. It was a magical city when it first started, and it remains a magical city today. Next, please. Even the layers of the fortified walls were often brilliant with mosaics, vibrant with colour. They shimmered in the heat haze of the noon stillness. Blue angels and genies, which you can see there in the enclaves, shimmered in the heat haze and excited everybody. These were public works of art, exposed on external walls and often within buildings, which memorialized the history and the art and the religion of the local people. Obviously, they were Muslims at this stage. And you might think the blue genies remind you of the Disney's blue genie. Well, this is where they got the idea. In the small corner at the bottom right-hand corner, there are areas of dove pots and pigeon boxes, because living creatures were as much a part of the celebration of art in the Muslim world at this stage as anything else. Next, please. So there you go, amazing architecture, gateways and gardens, Sometimes the gardens and the orchards and the farms were outside the wall, and sometimes they were inside the enclosing wall. And in fact, if you look at these images now, they almost look like images from early Hollywood in the 1920s and 30s. This is where all the ideas came from for film sets and the exciting lost cities of the East. So to actually work in a place like this was a great honor. It was actually like going and working in a living museum where both the plants, the people, and the buildings contributed to the atmosphere and the whole authenticity of such a place. Next, please. If you don't know anything about the Mughal Empire, what at least you need to know is there were the first 6 emperors, the Mughal emperors, who came from Central Asia many, many years ago, 200 or 300 years ago, and they trekked through India, dominating and conquering as they went. And with them, they brought their art and their architecture and their calligraphy, and especially their garden design styles and their styles for architecture. And they managed to roll all this together into a pattern that served both, not only the sort of royal princes and their sort of rulers, but including the normal people and common people. And they built amazing ways of shade trees crisscrossing their empire with fruit trees and wells at intervals to enable people to travel in comfort. Even though they were far below the princes and far below the rulers, there was a certain affinity, there was a certain respect for all people at all levels. They were a very rigid, religious group of people, and they were very successful both in art, in architecture, and in battle. Next, please. And then came the British at a certain stage, about, say, 1850s, and created a British Empire, or British India as they called it, by literally turning each of the different peoples in India against each other and then overcoming them one by one. It actually was not a direct invasion by the British. It was more a sort of trade operation run by the British East India Company, and it was later taken over by the government when the company was no longer able to control it. So it was very tactically done, but what happened is many of the artifacts of the original Mughal Empire were taken over by the British, anglicised in some ways, which we'll look at in a few slides later, but a lot of the culture and the management was kept in place, so it didn't lose a lot of its heritage. And that's what I've been looking at in my work in the sites around Pakistan and India and adjacent places. Next, please. And that gives you an idea. It's a model of the walled city of Lahore. And what you can see in the bottom right-hand corner is the layout, the remnants of the palace. The main palaces was a set of several palaces, actually, like a sort of compound, with a large mosque, which is a 4-pronged building in the immediate right bottom. And it was grew like almost an organic, let's say, an organic coral reef. Once the defensive wall had been built around the outside of the edge and then fortified, all the land inside could be developed. And originally, even some farms and gardens were inside, but as the city developed further, it actually became a much denser city. And in the end, as we talk about today, it is an extremely dense, highly populated city. And it's quite an amazing contrast to any other cities around the world. In that, this one is very largely intact because its boundary wall has survived. Next, please. A special and splendid city pattern arose both at the sort of the plan level, but also down at street level. The juxtaposition and compaction of sprawling monuments, multi-story townhouses, and a network of narrow streets created a really special place. It's vibrant in its genus via, the spirit of the street. The barracks and bazaars pressurized with people, the alleyways packed with communities and commerce. Street living woven with street space, It's something we all quest after now in our new developments anywhere around the world. To have this connection and this self-respect within a clean, functional street. Next, please. These accommodations were actually amazing, not only at the sort of structural level, but in the way they were actually operated. They were not only horizontally connected, but vertically, calling over between the balconies. You could speak from your neighbour to another neighbour and across in both ways, all around the street. You were connected before the cell phone. Chain baskets actually carried food up and money down for barter. So you would buy food in the street, put your money in a basket, lower it down in a chain, and then pull it back with your produce. So people were thinking about how to live in a very dense, creative city, even in those stages, and to make the sort of city and the building and the street life work for them. These spaces offer both the reassuring press of the crowd alongside a rare inner city solitude. So you could be in the community, but you can also be outside, above, remote, and overlooking it. It's not just a result of social inertia, its inhabitants know it, have always known it, and they love their city. We're talking about a city now which is 200 or 300 years old, and is still functioning with many of the parts that it originally started with. And that's seldom seen in cities of today. Next, please. So to give you a bit of background about the Pakistan we actually deal with now, the one that I sort of visit and try to work with the people and to solve some of their problems or to join them in their problems and try and identify what they can do to actually make their urban life and their sort of family life and even their political life a little better. Pakistan is the 6th most populous country in the world. It's incredibly packed with people. Greater Lahore is one of the most densely populated cities in the world. It has 10 million inhabitants. And the walled city itself has a population of over 200,000 people in only 2.6 square kilometers. That's a density of 77,000 people per square kilometer. So it's like nothing we know in South Africa. It is so dense, it is so compact, it is so high, 3, 4, 5 stories of buildings which really aren't that sound, and it is in an area of sometimes geological disturbance. So the fact that it has survived so far in any form is something of a miracle. Despite this, it remains a city and citizenry of great character and fortitude. Its collection of some 2,000 historical sites, monuments and mosaics, which are unique and overlooked in their lap of popular international recognition. So hardly anybody sees photographs of what I'm going to show you now. Hardly anybody goes to Pakistan for a cultural heritage experience. They might go there to play cricket, but normally we actually lose, so that doesn't work very well. Anyway, it was recognised as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO, and it is a remarkable place and have a remarkable future if heritage could be made a much greater part of its city, so it doesn't actually crumble before they actually get recognition around the world in a way like Angkor Wat has actually got recognition, or in fact even the pyramids or any other grand structures which have actually survived through the years. Next, please. So this is what it's like. It's like an exploding population, conflict between everybody, inadequate infrastructural modernization. Everybody's trapped in inelastic and medieval city situation, physical fabric that is in fact just imploding. So you can see the history and the conservation of the buildings in the background, but you've got the clamour of modern development of life and buses and transport and terrible pollution. So this is what has to be dealt with. In fact, it has to be dealt with for heritage reasons, because unless these problems are sorted out, the heritage fabric won't survive. It'll start to dissolve with the actual pollution of the area in the rain and in the sheer sort of air pollution that you get in these areas. And eventually, because of social deterioration, people start to move into the historic buildings and live there, or they become damaged and not repaired. So it's very vital that in any heritage restoration projects, the populace, the local populace, and their understanding and their sort of pressure points are not ignored. They have to be involved in the process, and they become a living part of it. Next, please. Even on the roads, very ornate. This has actually got a very good reason there. The juggernauts are the big lorries, which for some reason in the Pakistani tradition, they actually ornamentize them to this great level of funky paintings, really. And this is a really set part of their culture. And in fact, even the trucks themselves are laced with molded metal necklaces, which jingle as they go along, as some warning perhaps to pedestrians, but not to be run over in these majorly sort of crowded streets. But it's immediately, that's their culture on the road, in your face, and that is what is important about this city. It's a living population in a historic place. And how do you bring the two together without one destroying the other? Next, please. They're very innovative people, so they make life up as they go along, and they'll use ordinary vehicles and ancient vehicles like donkey carts, and new vehicles like buggies, and ancient vehicles like a cow pulling a cart, in ways that you wouldn't dream of, because they have to make the city work for themselves. And these are the people who are the target for UNESCO and other conservation bodies to bring into the fold of why they must actually save conservation areas or conservation buildings within the city, because they are part of everybody's heritage, everybody's open space, and in many cases, they are the only open space available within the curtain wall of the city itself. So super important to actually understand how people live. This is not going to change for probably another 50 or 100 years. So we have to work with those restrictions. Next, please. Even the cows are sacred, as you will be aware, in India and Pakistan. And so when dealing with open spaces, one has to be careful. One is not displacing uses or displacing animals or displacing recreational activities or actually cultural activities by simply doing some desktop planning and not understanding what happens on the ground. So feet on the ground and eyes on the street or eyes in the park are very useful for a landscape architect working in situations beyond the norm for their what they're trained for or have actually worked for in the past. Next, please. Improbable things happen all over the place to create some incredible geometries. So the fact that everybody can find their motorbike there when it looks identical, and these are not for sale, these are conventionally parked motorbikes where people go and withdraw them and use them. So just work that one out and try and use that in Cape Town. I don't think you'd actually find it out. So the people here are very sophisticated. In fact, they find their own ways to solve problems within the fabric of an urban city. And this is what got the Aga Khan Group for Culture quite excited about the fact is that these people weren't antagonistic to the preservation of culture. They weren't antagonistic to conservation of heritage, but they do have to live their lives in the same place. So the museum, which I think is a museum, is not actually just that. It is actually their place for living and for working, and it's for their culture. So the two things have to be melded together. So one has to become sympathetic, actually. Next, please. So there's the reality of it. What's happened is the old spaces of the Mughal palaces, the old spaces of the British Empire, like the moat, which the British put in around the fort to protect it, and it became areas like a carriage route under the British, and they became a cricket pitch, informal cricket pitches. All the gardens that were actually around the outside of the city itself have now become a ring of green. Many of them have been misused. Some still exist. Many have been used for utilities. But as long as there's not buildings built on them, there is actually space, and there's a room for negotiation to be had to actually reclaim these spaces for the city and actually connect them together in order to make proper linked green infrastructure. Next, please. So here's an example. This is part of the moat, which was actually around the whole city in the Victorian times. And it had been turned from the route of the river, which was diverted, to a moat for the British and the defence of other people who are actually using it as a defensive item. And then it was turned into a green park, which circumnavigated the city. And now it's being whittled away by ad hoc developments of either infrastructure or sometimes informal housing. So what the government decided to do was piece by piece to take this back and to reassemble it as at least an area of open space and an area that could contribute to infrastructure and drainage at the scale of a city, and actually start to make the city more livable by reusing open space. Next, please. And obviously everybody knows the real passion of Pakistan is cricket. And so this is the area just outside the walled city, which was used to, as originally the field where the Mughals would collect their horsemen and their cavalry and their elephants, which we saw in the very first picture which we had on the screen. And that was actually sort of a parade ground and a military area. And with the British coming to the area, it remained the same and was carried on for that. And over a period of time, and with the evolution of independence of Pakistan, it became turned into an informal sports ground. And obviously, cricket is played there by everybody, including women, including children. They play in any open area. And simply because this was a relic of a heritage area, it remained open, and the government actually defended it and did not allow it to develop, like you see the extremely dense housing in the background. So that's actually a piece of the new Lahore in the background there you can see. And where we're taking the photograph from is from the heritage city. It just demonstrates that it is possible, even in extreme circumstances of high populations and poor housing, you can create and protect areas which can have a general contribution to the lifestyles and the health of the population of the city. Next, please. This is just an illustration of the chaos that exists. If you think our electrical system in South Africa is bad, then this is actually even worse. And still in active use all over the city. And the idea is to slowly but surely dismantle this structure to reveal the old structure of the city, the architectural structure, and to actually do what all other cities do normally, except I think in America, is put all installations of electricity underground or out of sight, because they've realized now that the future of the walled city is to be one of heritage tourism and heritage for the local people. And by that I mean the entire country of Pakistan and local countries. So in fact, they see the city now as actually a proper piece of a heritage resource and not just a place to live. So this sort of thing has to be sort of factored out. And it's an economic decision, but it's actually in the long term. So because this, the actual city itself is a resource, it's a heritage resource, and it's there to be sort of used in a proactive way, and in a way that's actually sort of self-sustaining. Next, please. Equally, the sort of reality of modern life in the city is what you do with refuse and what you do with stormwater. So the whole infrastructure of the city is being revisited by engineers, by landscape architects and architects, and areas are being sold area by area, zone by zone, systematically, with lots of commitment to actually clean and restore a beneficial, healthy system for water, for traffic, anything you can think of that's actually an interaction between the city and the landscape is a target for their restoration. So this is how it was, and it's improving in the future. Next, please. So this is a very sort of interesting picture to me because it shows you how people still are living off the refuse, which is dumped. And at the bottom, you can actually see that the trees are standing in the water. The open spaces are still, even though they're public parks, acting as stormwater detention and retention areas. So they have an engineering function, are protected. But the people are being very opportunistic, and where they see refuse, they collect it, they sort it, and they resell it. It's a story very much like in South Africa. But they've taken it one step further. That in the bottom right-hand corner picture, there's somebody panning for gold in a sewer just below the gold market in the city. So these people are really living on the edge, but they're really entrepreneurial and innovative, and they're finding a way. They don't want to leave the city. They're finding a way to stay in the city at all costs because they also have a sense that the city is improving and it's changing, and their lives will eventually change too. Next, please. Right. At a micro planning level, public participation and partnership is essential to long-term stability. The walled city is fragile, and if left unconcerned, the familiar historical attrition will be overtaken by the juggernaut of catastrophic loss. Alternatively, if revitalized, it will be recognized as a beacon of urbano-cultural adaptive reuse. And that's a sort of typical term people who sit in Europe think of, conservation bodies, I think we're all going to understand it, but we all can be quite practical. In these situations, you have to be practical. You make the best of a bad job in some of these countries. You find the resources in both the people and in the nurseries and in the building fabric shops with the carpenters. You find ways to actually rebuild and to recreate things that would be very difficult to do in other countries where the skills have been lost a long time ago in carpentry and, let's say, mosaic, which still exists in Pakistan. Next, please. Next, please. So in fact, what we're saying is the whole city is a museum. And the good thing about it, there are parts because they're either religiously orientated, or there are areas which are physically now being uplifted. And here we see the ancient lanes of the old city being repaved in order to actually have sewage beneath the paving, so running in conduits. So the sewage is taken out, the stormwater is taken out, and your people are now able to actually use the areas between the buildings to access where the houses and the accommodation are, and to access the shops and the sort of small industrial areas where cobblers and other people work, like butchers and people in commerce, because the whole city has to live. It can't simply be a display in a case. It's not an item, it's not an artifact you can take and stick in a museum. The whole city has to survive, for the value of the city to survive, and for its architecture and for its landscape. Amazingly, some green spaces have survived completely intact. Next, please. Now, this gives you an overview of the city and the park outside, just from a sense of scale. Because one of the big things from, and I know it sounds like, well, are we talking about landscape? But landscape and traffic and landscape and roads and landscape and parking, they all go together. And one has to actually sort out the problems of the other. So in this instance, you can see there's a green moat going around the whole Vistaline area of the city, which is in white, where the number 3 is. And then just to the edge of it is a nice big green square, and that's where the palace area is of the walled city. And it's fortified with a big city wall. And then outside the city wall, excuse me, is the area in green with some blue water bodies in it, which is the old parade ground we saw in the earlier slides, which were used for military maneuvers. and has now entirely become a public park. So the public park is substantially big. It's almost the size of the city. So now the two things are in balance. You have a very dense city. There's the offset to that. You have a very extensive park with many opportunities of flower gardens, sports facilities, and the moat you can see going around the edge is a walking system, so you can circumnavigate the whole city. So be you a local resident, or be you somebody, a tourist visiting from America or from Europe, and you want to see a very authentic medieval city and how it operates and the scale of it, that's what this is. So it's a living museum in some ways, but it's a vibrant living place, a livelihood for many other people. So it's not pastiche, it's not, it's not a theme park, it's actually reality. And the detail in the street and the detail in how people live is what you experience when you visit the place and you get absorbed in it and you try their food and you become part of the public place. Next, please. That's an overview on it to give you the sense of scale again. You can see the moat around the outside edge. And so actively what's happening there now, each of those green strips, which is you can see is invaded by brown blocks of development, sometimes substations, sometimes other sort of infrastructure, are being decommissioned or put underground or removed to an external site so that the moat can actually become a continuous route, a historical route around the heritage site of the city. And all that sort of crenellated grey stuff in the middle of the city, that's housing. That's the reality of the buildings from the air. It's an enormous sort of crystalline city with this band of green around it, and the very big palace area at the top in that sort of beige colour. So re-establishing the circular garden is something that has been underway now for probably about 15 years in slow bites, and it's slowly getting there. It's a long-term project, and it's going to take a very long time. And obviously being interrupted by COVID and other world events is not very helpful to World Heritage, this advancement. But as long as these areas can be maintained during these stressful periods, then we perhaps have a future for heritage to look forward to. Next, please. Next, please. That's it. Right, so the photographs, you'll be pleased to know, the photographs get a lot lighter from this point on, because we have to go through the sort of the scale of the place before you can get to a reality of what's happening in the street. So in fact, the streets are open space in their own right. The streets are celebrated by the people who use them, and the streets for tourists to actually visit are a very lively experience and genuine and authentic. So that is actually what a real cultural experience and why it has value to UNESCO. It's strangely enough, it's a living organism in this little tiny city. And it's very interesting to actually go and stay there for a few days and eat in these places and actually shop in these places and see what it's like. Next, please. The grace is in the detail. Mughal, Sikh art, even crafts left by the British, ironmongery, armaments, defensive measures. The whole city as a whole is a whole blend of all sorts of things. It's actually quite extraordinary. Next, please. The Mughals were extraordinary artisans and artists, and this is the examples of their work in both paintings, applique, inlays. You can see tulips there very clearly. You can identify the plants by looking at their artwork. They're that good. You can identify sometimes species by looking at their artwork. And as much as that exists, that's actually part of their culture. The rest of it is still with them, which is their culture of cooking and food and the ingredients they use. I was told they still use recipes from the Mughal times. They still actually use the same crops from the Mughal times, and not much in Pakistan has changed at a cultural level in certain areas. Although, of course, their sense of dress has changed, but in fact, it's also as flamboyant and as colourful as the clothes that the Mughals wore. So some things don't change. Next, please. The level of ornamentation is, and the technique is extraordinary. Now you see cypress trees done in broken glass, broken coloured glass. You can see a poppy there, very sort of artistically rendered, but very accurate in the type of poppy it was. And this is the sort of information we started to use to put together a Mughal plant list to actually enable us to actually start work on parks and gardens in the urban area of Lahore in the future. Next, please. Next. Next. Oh, thank you. And as I said to you before, birds and, let's say, creatures were very much part of the religion and their expression of religion. And remember now, Muslims today don't allow images to be used in their religion, but they did in the Mughal times. They were very keen on art. And this is a picture now of the area where we were gathering our information from the city. This is the palace area, which is a haven now. It's used as a public park. So originally it was semi-derelict, and efforts were made to restore it to the first level, to stabilize the degradation of the buildings, to stabilize the condition of the trees, because originally this entire elevated platform of the palaces, gardens, was actually irrigated by a screw system. So they would lift water from 2 stories down at the base of the big fortified walls we saw earlier, and 1 or 2 oxen would revolve around in a circle with the water using a water pump, and then would actually screw the water up to the height 2 stories high in the air, and then it would rush out into the irrigation channels and run around the walls of the entire fort, distributing the water to the city and around the walls of the palace, and everywhere would have water in a connected piped way, and bathhouses and everything that went with it. But their primal celebration of the water was obviously because it's a very sort of artistic relationship with the garden, the paradise garden, sort of fourfold garden, which you'll see in some illustrations shortly, where you have water as water bodies, you have water as irrigation running in open streams, which makes a noise, a very pleasant sort of tinkling noise as it runs along, and as an air conditioning, passive air conditioning. So if you're elevated, you get the wind, you actually get these cool waters running around, and this is a place where everybody would want to actually be and recreate, because it's better than actually being near the river, which is full of mosquitoes and actually very hot and smelly. Next, please. So this is classic Mughal gardens at a very high level, and these are palace gardens. And what you're seeing there is actually fourfold. You can see it's actually got quarters, got into quarters, which represent 4 sacred rivers of Islam. There's an island in the center, which also has a very deep religious meaning for them. And you see the very sort of strange architecture in the background, sort of curvy linear architecture, which is actually curved marble plates, which are bolted together by iron staples. It's like the sort of architecture you hardly ever see anywhere except where the Mughals went. So it's in Mughal India, it's in Mughal Pakistan, and it's partly in Bangladesh. And the level of quality of workmanship and of material in these gardens and these palace courtyards are just sensational. And they are in a beautiful condition. They have survived the attrition and pollution of the years. So they're 200 or 300, 400 years old, depending on where they are. So very special. And this is the sort of project that which we were aiming to give a sort of framework to how to go about doing this work effectively over a long period of time, teach people stonework, to teach people horticulture, and to teach people about generally managing parks in order for them to actually be beneficial to the local people as well as visiting tourists. So nobody just wants to make a tourist trap. It's much more fundamental than that. It's actually about creating a place for the local people which has a dual purpose. Next, please. So this is a step outside the city now. So the principles which we were using inside the city are best seen outside the city where some of the larger Mughal tombs are. And most of those now are also World Heritage Sites and have been turned into public parks. They always actually were public parks, even in the days of the Mughals. Their tomb areas and certain of their parks were open to the public. This is a historical sort of fact. They were recognized that all people were equal in a certain way and also have access to sort of, the heaven and earth and the green part was part of that. So that was the sort of idyll of Eden, which they had in their religion, and actually remains there. And it's a very important factor. So these public parks, which had a religious sort of sense to them originally, are now generally public parks, and they're not quite as they would have been in their day. So what you see now with these big green lawns and these nicely lifted trees would have in the Mughal days would have been flower beds full of flowering plants. There would have been orchards full of various types of fruiting tree, because that's what Mughal planting looked like. The planting you're seeing there was actually imposed by the British, by Lord Curzon during the time of the British Empire, Indian Empire, because the British liked things clean and neat, as you might remember if you've ever been to England. Everything's clean and neat. So the floriferous and the body of planting, which actually defined the old parks, has largely gone, and you will only see it now if it's actually going to be restored in that way. And one or two places have been restored in that way. I think Topkapi Palace in Turkey has been restored that way, back to what it would have looked like in the Mughal days. So if you look at the Mughal paintings, you look at Mughal artwork, you get a sense of fullness and crowding of plants and an exuberance of plants and a love of plants. And when you look at the British era, you get a sense of it's about control, it's about keeping things in order, and that's what they were trying to do, obviously, in the country they were occupying. So anyway, but the buildings are genuine and they are being restored or have been restored, and they give a backdrop. And hopefully in the future, portions of these parks will be restored in an authentic manner, so you can really see the building and the architectural style in a landscape style, which is actually authentic too. Next, please. So this is back to the inside of the fort. It just shows you that because the park, because the area of the park originally for the Mughals themselves, the palace gardens, were kept intact, then the trees were able to survive the 200 years to be alive now for us to appreciate the scale and what the impact of the tree is. I mean, many of these are exotic big trees, very, very fast growing, but they still actually need water, they still need ground to grow in. And so it wasn't a case here of actually sort of making clean. Again, the beds you see, just the lawns of grass you see, and the occasional topiary shrubs, they're from the British period, but the original tree planting is from the Mughal period. There's an overlay here. So one thing you see, and then one thing that's there. So it's like the story of palimpsest. You get layers of landscape placed over each other, and you need to decide at some point which one to choose in order to restore it. And the best thing to do is to restore a piece of each, so you can compare and contrast what happened to the landscape and learn about process, because landscapes are always changing, gardens are always changing, and if you fix it in time, that's what the French do in their sort of very formal gardens, that's one thing. But to have a garden that evolves through different periods is very interesting and very purposeful in an urban environment, because people need space. And they don't just need a formal garden, they need more than that, they need living space. Next, please. Right, so this is just to show you the amount of exoticness there is. Why I would actually encourage you one day to go to Lahore and actually sort of, challenge your own judgments. This looks like a sort of Hollywood or a Star Wars creation. But it was obviously created by the Mughals and the British together, a piece each, and they created a sort of fantastical life for what they considered was going to be a fantastical empire. It was actually generating huge amounts of money in trade at the time and keeping the British Exchequer afloat. And so they put a lot of effort into ornamentation. Next, please. And you see it starts these elements in scaling. So Mughal Gardens always had water. They always had moving water largely because they wanted the water to move so they could actually get rid of the mosquitoes. They wanted the water to actually move to give them some background ventilation or air conditioning, I suppose, passive air conditioning. They actually grew plants like lilies in their ponds, so they weren't always sterile water bodies like is mostly seen now. If you ever look at the Taj Mahal, you'll see it's very, very sterile in terms of lawn and what would have happened around it sort of horticulturally. And in some cases now, they're starting to install, as you can see in the bottom left-hand picture, more plantings to try and bring back some of the original Mughal gardens, slowly but surely into a better state of representation. Next, please. Just to point out there that these gardens were populated by not only people and furniture and musicians and actors and jugglers, they were also populated by pets, food and drugs, which were used quite happily in the Mughal Empire by many people. So the scale that we got involved with to start with was to try and actually stabilize many of the parks which we saw and many of the sort of horticultural areas. And it was a case of doing very careful tree work to make sure the trees could survive and weren't damaging the physical fabric of the palaces too much. So that was gently done. Enabling people to access areas of shade beneath the trees by lifting canopies carefully to actually make the ground usable, because obviously these parks are in the middle of areas where lots of people want to go. So you need to have physical capacity in the park, but also relying on just old tried and tested machinery, like a rain cannon, which I think is about 50 years or even older, which was used to actually water the huge lawns. And eventually, these cannons will be replaced by more subtle irrigation. But for now, it actually is a very engaging part of the offering of the park to see these being used. And of course, it's used by the children as an energetic water feature. So there is some, you don't have to change everything. You don't have to try to do too much in a place, because you might take away the real character of it, which is the character of the people and the activity of the people. So in landscape architecture, people are just as important, and their activities and their sort of desires just as important as actually the veracity or authenticity of what your restoration is going to be. And the sort of dogma picture at the bottom right-hand corner, that is a typical Mughal planting bed, which is actually used to actually you change the flowers in it on a regular basis. Partially left over from the sort of British period, partially replaced by the British, but it's been restored. But at the moment, they don't have the wherewithal and the nurseries to actually provide annual plants to the parks anymore. So those sort of areas have fallen away. Literally, the parks are entirely composed of trees and grass, which is it's not the authentic piece of park. That did not look like authentically. Over a period of time, certain areas of the park will be made in the authentic style, and the rest will be left as activity parks. Next, please. More detail, because you have to saturate yourself with the detail. It's just too good to be true, and you could not reproduce this now. Next, please. The scale of some of the gardens are quite exquisite and brilliant in their own right. I mean, they're literally on the size of a couple of football fields. And the Mughals got very scientific in some of their design in terms of pattern. You can see that in sort of filigree of the railing at the top right of the picture. You can see it in the what's called a water shawl in the bottom left-hand picture. That is a carved slab of marble, which has little bumps in it, like sort of woven knots. It actually looks like it's been woven, but it's actually made of solid stone. And what happens when you actually pump water over it, which they did in Muslim times, and they still do today, the water stands in little peaks, which is it's almost unbelievable to see. The water stands in peaks like minute little water fountains, and they fall over each other like a chain. And it's called a shadar, which means a sort of a water curtain or a shawl, and it makes the most exotic sound, shall I say. It's like a musical water feature, and it sparkles. So at night, they put candles across the top of it, and the candle light would sparkle, or the lamp light would sparkle on these water features. So it's the one on the left is actually done with water. The one on the right, bottom right, actually has a series of lots of little little holes on the bottom, like pigeonholes. And each one of those had a multicolored candle and a lantern in it. And then again, they would actually play water in front of it in a sheet, and you would actually look at it and you get a light show basically, because the light would flicker and move around all over the white surface of the marble. So you could actually see a light show in a garden, just like you would do with electricity now. So highly sophisticated, the garden science went into the work of the Mughals. And it's rather a shame that it's not so recognized these days. There's only 1 or 2 Mughal gardens outside India and Pakistan. And there's a new one, simply one that's been built in Canada, believe it or not, to celebrate the Muslim culture, which has been exported to Canada. Next, please. This is also a peculiarly Muslim piece of decoration. It's carved out of one piece of marble, and it's a seclusion area for women. Women will stand on one side listening to the conversation, men on the other side, which is obviously not reprehensible and not defensible. But the actual carving of this panel is extraordinary. How you can, if you make one mistake in actually carving this panel, it's a throwaway. And there are hundreds and hundreds of these panels making up the rooms of the palaces in the Lahore fort. So it's an extraordinary combination of architecture and horticultural skill and artistic skill has gone into this whole building grouping. Next, please. If you go there as a tourist, which I sort of went as a consultant stroke tourist, then what's special about Pakistan? Why would we want to put all this effort into conserving it and actually getting involved in other people's religion and culture and art? It's because it's so special. It actually belongs to the world. It's a thing on a sort of global scale. So there are so few of these artifacts and these places around, and the fact they're still inhabited. So here are the local people in a rainstorm, in a major downpour, like a monsoon, still enjoying the park. It's warm rain, and it's a very hot country. But it's exciting in a way that you won't find in many countries. It has less control, yes, but it is actually, opportunistically a marvelous place to visit and actually sort of think about how other people live. And it's extraordinary. And much in life is actually very ordinary, repetitive. And after COVID, we're all actually sick and tired of being sort of hedged up and living in our own sort of our own house. These people have always lived in their greater city. They live at a city level. They've always lived that way. They live in great, in interconnected families. there's a certain purity to it, and that's actually very encouraging that that's actually survived over the decades and over the centuries, and that this city has remained, this city and this palace and this old city, this fortified city, has remained intact enough to have its own character. And one of the urban designers working with us on this scheme to actually sort of find some principles to actually to motivate keeping some of these areas intact in these urban areas, in these landscape areas, was to say, you can, in the old city of Lahore, you can have 16 different breakfasts from 16 different cultures, micro cultures, anywhere in that area. So it's not like there's uniformity in how people live or what people do. It's like a healthy city process. You can have many different people living in a city, side by side, not in enmity, but actually sort of peacefully, and they can have a creative life. They can be creative in the open space, they can be creative inside, which is very important because that's what we're aiming for with our new cities now. So we can all learn from these examples. Next, please. More of the same, really. It's like people in adverse circumstances, they just get on with it. And perhaps we've actually learned how to do that ourselves. This city has been flooded many, many times over the years, probably thousands of times over the years. It's had earthquake issues over the years, but people coming back and actually support it, and their culture remains intact. So that's a good thing. Next, please. Always exquisite art, wherever you go, in all parts of the city. And the fact that people are able to restore it, you can see the panel on the left there is a restored panel to an exact pattern of one which they use as a model, but they can now recreate it authentically because it's really being done by people without machines. It's being done by hand in a very sort of calculated and cultivated way. So it's proper restoration and it's authentic work. Same goes for the one in the bottom right-hand corner. Totally repaired because it had been eaten by acid rain. Obviously, the motor cars, over the years, and the buses have contributed acid to the atmosphere. You get terrible acid rain there, but things can be repaired, and cultures can be saved, as can artistic abilities. Next, please. There is a young lady actually learning and practicing how to restore the mosaics. So they literally have, I think it's 400 meters of mosaics, 30 meters high, which tell the story of the fort over the various different Mughal emperors, all being restored at the moment. It will be finished in about 2.5 years' time. They're still working on it, but it's actually on an internal wall of the palace we just looked at. So it's quite an amazing effort being made by local people and local artisans. And the idea is they get trained by people who may come from Italy or may come from Spain, where there's a tradition of tiles. And some of those traditions have been lost or skills have been lost in Pakistan, but now they're being restored. So you're not just restoring the buildings or the landscape, you're restoring the people. Next, please. There, the walls I speak about, that wall on the left-hand side there, they're all mosaics on those walls, going all the way up to the top in panels, which describe courtly scenes and other things. Just to give you the scale of the trees, that's the sort of tree they've actually been able to conserve in some of the public parks. So even when it seemed like people wanted to cut down trees for firewood, they were stopped by a local group. They were encouraged to actually sort of keep parks open, keep the parks for stormwater drainage. You can see that the picture at the top right-hand corner is actually a flooded park. Well, the park floods for a very good reason. The water needs to go somewhere, and there's not enough room for it to go directly into the river, which is now a good 2 kilometers away, because rivers in India move. So parks need to function. The heritage needs to function and actually pay its own way. And they've started to actually bring new sculptors and new innovations even into the public parks and sometimes into the heritage areas, just to say, we also want to make a contribution to heritage. And this is our heritage today. So they're not saying only there should be only museums. There should be areas where people can express their culture historically and currently. It's very important, especially in the Muslim world. Next, please. But it also doesn't all go right. That's the issue. So this is it's a brick wall, believe it or not. It's a brick defensive wall. I think it was built by the British, and a second skin was put on by the British later on. So there was two skins of brick over a fortified hill, which was made defensive, for both the Mughals in the early days to use it as a hill for defense, and then the British used it as their defensive position as well. But this just happened to fall down when we were actually on site. It just shows you how fragile everything in the world of sort of conservation of buildings or conservation of landscapes is. Everything is fragile. So what's been happening here, just a dripping tap almost, a leaking pipe from the top has managed to destroy 200 years of construction. And yes, it's going to be restored. The bricks are going to be collected, cleaned, and it's going to be restored by UNESCO. Next, please. And then just life. So yeah, so it's not just life of the Mughals, it's life on the ground. It's spectacularly colourful and spectacularly interesting when you actually go to a country as different to Pakistan. So traditions survive there. I would recommend you go. Next, please. Beauty is around us everywhere, even in the rain. And people are very comfortable. They don't run away from you. They are very happy to be part of your experience of their country. Next, please. And we're very close to the end. So next, please. So when all is said and done, city living is a shared experience. We all dream of a place in the sun in the morning and a place in the shade in the afternoon. Next, please. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Anthony. Oh, sorry. My mute button is acting funny on me now. Let's get this going. Woo, woo. You've just taken us on a trip around the world. I don't know about everybody on the call, but I'm ready to pack my bags and get going and go and visit Pakistan. Absolutely amazing, Mr. Anthony. And we've got such just wonderful comments. Everybody just saying on the call, absolutely great. The pictures look amazing. I just want to pull some of them here. Excellent presentation. Hester saying, wow, this is absolutely amazing. Penny says, wonderful. Desiree saying, thank you, Anthony. I'm fascinated with the art and architecture that has survived the centuries, they're moving so quickly now. Anna saying, thanks a million. Would love to visit and experience the culture and history. Sherry saying, thank you for the amazing presentation with lots of lessons to be learned. I think everybody's just blown away by the quality and how historical architecture can be such an amazing part of the human life and human interaction back in Pakistan. Let me just take just a few questions quickly. So tell us, Mr. Anthony, how long were you in Pakistan for to be able to experience such an amazing city?
Sorry, say that again.
How long were you in Pakistan for the experience, and did you pick up some language perhaps?
No. So I was there. I went on two visits, and it took about each one was about 2 weeks and a week to get there and back. So So they were like sort of 2 or 3 week things. But a lot of the work was actually done remotely. So during COVID, we actually sat in our various offices around the world, because there were several people involved in the team I was working with, and we actually wrote a book about this project. And it was all about how to actually now take all the results of what we found back to the local people, and then to teach them in a manual all the things that we'd observed that they'd forgotten in a nice way, as in say, this is how things were done before, and we've seen a few people doing it, and these are our best case scenarios. So this is the way to do it. And it was all illustrated, and in Pakistan it's very easy because they speak English. It's fantastic. It's a wonderful country. In fact, they can speak English, and you can speak directly to them. Anybody at any level you can speak to, a professor, a gardener, an architect. It's very uplifting, and then it's a joint effort. Going forward, it's a joint effort, but to do it, they need funds from Germany or France or some richer country, perhaps even Britain, because those countries profited out of empires a long time ago, and there's some value left in those countries, and it has to be resolved, and it has to be brought back. These countries and their economies need restoration as much as their old buildings and antiquities.
Sure, absolutely amazing. And just just for the interest of everybody that's still on the call, and we still have a few individuals on the call, and we're not going to keep everybody for too long. But what type of funds are we talking about? And in terms of the legacy projects that you're running back in Pakistan, or the proposal that have come out of the research, how long will it take, or how long is it envisaged to be able to turn things around and get the city kind of where it can be envisioned to be in?
Well, I can be honest and tell you, it'll be several lifetimes, because these are big projects, and it often takes years for the skills to be brought back. Say stonemasonry, or even the skills of horticulture. It takes a long time to get them back. So we've done projects before where we've turned projects around in 2 years or 3 years. And once or twice, I think it took us 4 or 5 years. But on a project of that scale, you'd be talking about probably 50, 100 years. But the thing is, you have to start. The thing is to start. If you don't start, you never get the skills, you never get the people, and there's projects all over the world to work on like this. Pakistan is just a snapshot of one place. There's Bangladesh, equally, has fantastic Mughal buildings. And many countries around the world all need some of that. In Africa too, many buildings in Africa are actually sort of breaking down, running down. They need to be restored. So, and if you have those skills locally, that becomes part of your tourist offering, part of your culture, and part of your just looking after your own authentic meaning of life. It's like looking after the Cape Town Castle and Table Mountain. You look after both of them.
I must say, a combination of architecture and horticulture is a topic that is just absolutely amazing. It's just the fusion of community living, buildings, and just the way of life. I think it's absolutely remarkable. So just last but not least, taking all these key learnings that you've had, where does South Africa phase up? How are we doing? Are we doing good? Are we too far off? What should we be doing right now to be able to, not to find ourselves in more dire strains, like countries like Pakistan?
Okay, that's a very good question, difficult one. So what's important is, South Africa is always sort of concentrate on tourism, tourism and wildlife tourism are the easy sorts of targets. But what's very important is for equally the heritage fabric. So I mean all heritage, from the earliest heritage you can find to even sort of more only perhaps 100 years old. You need skilled people who can work on it. So that the missing thing in South Africa is artisans who are really skilled in horticulture, in landscape. I mean, actually doing the work, in actually doing stonework, in doing wrought iron or cast iron. All these things you need when you do restorations, especially at the landscape scale. It doesn't exist here anymore. And so it's a fantastic role for people, because artisans, you need many people. If you're going to restore a landscape, you need a lot of people. So it's like in America when they did sort of government works, they'd employ thousands of people to create a dam, the Hoover Dam. Lots of people working on that. You need big capital projects in South Africa where you take something that's really conservation worthy, be it removing alien from Table Mountain, or be it actually restoring a building in the Adderley Street, and you actually train people to do that. And that the skills are not there at the moment. And thank God, it's one thing the computer can't do. You have to have physical people with chisels and people with spades to do work, and people with knowledge about plants and materials and artistic things. And so that's the quality of level you actually want for the people of South Africa. You want some depth. You don't just want a job. You want a career, or you want a trade. And I know stonemasons around the world, and they've done very well by being stonemasons, because there's a lot of stonework to repair in the world from a heritage point of view, but there aren't many stonemasons to do it.
Sure, that's most certainly a mouthful, and I think South Africa's Vision 2030 and strategy is all about, capital investment and job creation and growing industries, growing trades. So what I love most about this presentation is that it's live, it's been recorded, and it's going to be shared on multiple social media platforms. So please go on ahead and like our Facebook page, the Kirstenbosch National Botanical Facebook page. Go ahead and like Straight Nature Facebook page, as well as the Room to Grow Facebook page. And this particular presentation will also be live on those platforms. Those that missed this amazing presentation and the beautiful work that Mr. Anthony is doing currently, please go share onto your own Facebook page, like and refer your friends to it. And if there are any questions, comments, please leave them out on our social media platforms, and we'll try and answer some of them. And if we can't, we'll reach out to Mr. Anthony Wain to answer some of them and post it back on our social media platforms. Mr. Wain, it's just been an absolute privilege to be on this call. And let me also, extend this word of courtesy to everybody that's here. Running online platforms is often quite a little bit difficult. Sometimes the sound is not quite where we want it to be, but we continue to improve every time. And we are absolutely privileged to be able to have and host Mr. Anthony Wain here with us. And we definitely want you back again to talk about some of the other exciting projects that you're doing. Now, Mr. Wain, in 30 seconds or 15 seconds, last words from your side.
I'd like to thank you and your viewers for taking the time to listen to my diatribe about what I think is the way forward. And I just encourage everybody who gets an opportunity to go and see any sort of heritage site, any sort of natural site. It's the best way to spend your life. So don't stay in the traffic, don't stay in the shopping centre. You get out there and actually enjoy reality while it's still here.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Like I said to you, I think as you wrapped up the presentation, I said, I've been looking at my bag and I've been saying, I need to start packing my bag now. I need to go and visit because of the culture, the beautiful heritage sites that you've just said, the people, the pictures, the colors. I could almost smell some of the food as you're going through your slides. So definitely something to put on our bucket list to go and visit that beautiful country, Pakistan. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it from our side. Until we meet again in the next 2 weeks, thank you everybody for joining us for this particular presentation. It's been a blast, and thank you, everybody. So please pack your bags and get ready to go and visit all these amazing sites that we have in South Africa and outside South Africa and everywhere else in the world. Everybody, thank you very much, and see you guys next time. Thank you, Mr. Anthony.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.